You make a mistake and it's brought up against you 30 years later to keep you out of public office when you might have grown enormously as a human being. I think we need to see civility actually as a tough-minded virtue that says, picking up on the old Evelyn Beatrice Hall idea, that I may disagree with you, but I'll defend to the death your right to say it. It implies two things. I'll respect you enough to say you have a right to put your ideas on the table, and then the ideas are the issue because that's where we'll get the best way forward. It's not for me to demonise you. I don't like your ideas, but absolutely you've got the right to put them on the table. Let's thrash those out. Now, it's an unequal playing ground because that's not the way the game's being played at the moment, but I don't see any option. And even people like Gandhi sort of kind of got that, didn't he? I mean, it's about forgiveness. That's something that's washing out of our culture. I don't know how relationships ever work if we can't forgive. And I think we have to be prepared to practice that and say, look, it's okay, I'm sorry, I was offended, but that doesn't matter, let's move on. Rather than this perpetual, I will carry the offence to the grave. And that's the other great problem we've got in our culture, because even if you can try and forgive now, you can't forget because social media's stored up absolutely everything.
So that's also the interesting part, is that the asymmetry of the rules, I think, is what's becoming harder and harder for conservatives. So, for example, Justin Trudeau can show up in blackface. I don't think most people think he's a true racist by any stretch. He did something stupid. It was, times change, all of those things. We've had the governor here, Ralph Northam, also, blackface 30 years ago, but he's a Democrat. And the point is that they're both still in power. Well, we know if these were conservatives or Republicans or whatever, they would be destroyed.
They would
and
be.
then because of that, because of that, then we see the conservatives going, no, we have to destroy them too.
Yeah.
And I think that's the impulse that you're saying, no, we have to fight that impulse.
Yeah, I believe that's right. I mean, I think the point would be to go to frankly, the hypocrisy of it and highlight that, but to try and avoid doing the triumphalism. Remember the lessons when we stopped burning one another at the stake. At the heart of this unique model of Western harmony where we learnt to live with one another's deepest differences was a willingness to respect another person's conscience and let them live truly to that conscience, as long as they are not damaging other people. And I don't mean by that occasionally offending people. This idea that you can't give offence, that is a way to shut down debate if ever there was. And if I'm honest about my life, the times in which I've grown have been the times when I've been grossly offended because somebody else has told me something about me I haven't wanted to hear.
Yeah. And
I've had to grow out of it. Jonathan Haidt makes that point. We tell our kids, we bring them up to believe that what doesn't kill you will make you weaker. He says, actually, we need to build resilience, and when we get the setbacks, we've got to learn from them and not just be like a plastic cup that you drop on the floor and recovers its shape. We actually need to be people, when we've had a setback, who grow. He calls it anti-fragility. And our parents and grandparents believed that. And look at what the great generation, as you call them in this country, went through.
So is that just all then a function of our success? That our parents, you're right, our parents and grandparents went through it, grandparents particularly, at least in an American context. And because of that grit and fight, then they sort of got us to unprecedented wealth, a growing middle class in the United States. And what happened? Well, we got participation trophies.
Yeah, I think you may be right. And maybe it took, I grew up with a father who had a horrendous Second World War. And I was born quite late in his life. And so I always lived with a man who'd seen war, he'd volunteered, hated it, could never talk of it, was almost killed in the campaign against Rommel in the Western Desert. And that's shaped me. But then I'm conscious that I had a desire with my 4 children to want to snowplough for them. The tendency was there. I wanted to remove every obstacle in a way that my father didn't try for me. He knew instinctively that a few challenges were a good thing for me. And I knew that too, but I had to pull myself back because the instinct all the time was to make it soft and easy. And I think Jonathan Haidt's right. It doesn't work. And he goes on to say that we then encourage our children to trust their feelings. Your feelings are always right. We know that's not right. You have to think things through. Your feelings must accord with reality. It's just dangerous to feel something's. I feel that water would be nice, and that the signs saying that there are sharks in there shouldn't get in the way of me having a good swim, And then the other one, this problem that goes to the heart of what we're talking about. We teach our children that the dividing line between good and bad is between people, or that life is a battle between good and bad people. That's a disaster. It's a disaster.
Yeah, most people on the other side believe that they're good too. They may be wrong.
Well, not only that, we're all a mixture.
Yeah.
And why can't we go on a journey? You write quite a bit about how you've been on a journey politically.
Yeah.
Well, isn't that a good thing? You know, to think things through and to learn from your mistakes. Forgive me, it's not for me to say that you made mistakes or whatever, but I know I have.
I have absolutely made mistakes, I promise you.
Yeah, but you're not allowed to now in the lexicon of those who hold the microphones in our society. And you see that with social media.
Yeah.
The thing we were talking about earlier, you make a mistake and it's brought up against you 30 years later to keep you out of public office, when you might have grown enormously as a human being. And you might have asked those that you hurt or that you've misjudged or whatever mistakes you made for forgiveness. You've grown enormously, you've come to a different place. Why should we not respect that?
Do you think, oddly, though, that the end of secularism leads us to that place of unforgiveness? Do you think that is sort of what you were talking about earlier, that if you remove all of whatever traditional belief there is, that you will end up in a place that will be so subjective that how would forgiveness even make sense in that world? That sort of seems to me where we're sort of at the moment, yeah.
I mean, this is a great thing now. It's all about power. Everyone talks about power. But it's very inadequate. Douglas Murray says this. If you walk up to most people in the street and say, what most matters to you most, they won't say power. They'll talk about love, they'll talk about relationship and so forth. But I think relationship in the Western model draws an enormous amount from our understanding of that thing called the cross. And the central message there was a death, a life surrendered for enemies out of love. Loving your enemies. We can't even love our friends half the time.
Yeah.
We need to learn to love our enemies again, which is why I think I'm all for vigour in debate. I love what you do. I love what Jordan Peterson does. I love what... I mean, this is a big part of the picture. You've got enormous intellectual vigour coming back into Western life. And that's tremendously encouraging. And it's an enormous privilege just to play a tiny little bit, you know, I hope, in facilitating that with my own website, for example, and so forth. But I see this as tremendously encouraging. But we've got to break the very model that's brought us to that place in the first place, which is the rejection of the idea of the respect and recognition of the worth and dignity of others.
Are you amazed how this is a truly worldwide phenomena right now? So that's why I started the interview by saying that, you know, you sent me this email
Yes.
3 years ago, and then, you know, flash forward basically 2.5 years, and I'm in Australia and I'm doing this event with you, and everyone in that room knew who I was.
Yep.
And now most of them were there for Jordan. I can see that point. But the basic idea that what we're talking about in America is the same thing you're talking about in Australia. It's
Yep.
the same thing they're talking about France. They're talking
right.
about it in Mexico.
Yep.
It's not purely a Western
Yep.
society idea anymore. It's everywhere now.
It is indeed. And a couple of observations. The wealthiest countries in particular, where it's been very easy for a long time, have lost sight, I think, of the idea of suffering. And suffering can be very instrumental in determining character and resilience and compassion for others because you understand. We've got rid of the idea that suffering, you know, is part of life. We try to pretend we can build perfect society, which is why people make unreal demands on government.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we don't need God anymore, none of that stuff. We don't need suffering anymore. So, Mr. Congressman, I expect you to solve every ill.
Give me everything.
Give me everything. And Mr. Congressman has been unwise enough too often. If there's a congressman listening, please say, I could say exactly the same about what I was under the House of Representatives or a senator in Australia. We have senators just like you do. We have a Westminster House of Representatives based on the British House of Commons. Our Senate is modelled exactly on your Senate, so we call it a Westminster system. And we've just got to break that cycle again and rediscover some roots. Or this is one of, you know, a conservative doesn't believe that the people who have gone before them were lesser. But our culture now seems to think that those who went before us have nothing to teach us. That is a fatal flaw.
If you're looking for more honest and thoughtful conversations about politics instead of nonstop yelling, check out our politics playlist. And if you want to watch full interviews on a variety of topics, watch our full episode playlist all right over here. And to get notified of all future videos, be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell.